What advice would you have for founders?
I would say that as you're having conversations with investors during your fundraise, I would encourage everyone to feel empowered to ask all the questions that they need to know about an investor to be able to make a good decision. Very often, first-time founders see it as, I'm pitching my business to someone and I need to convince an investor to be able to lean in, but you need to make sure that you're bringing on the right partners to be able to support your growth.
This is Alastair, and welcome back to the Venture Variety Show. This podcast is where I talk with founders, investors, and operators who are shaping how startups and the stories around them get built. Really excited for today's podcast because we'll be talking about platforms. Today I'm joined by Olivia O'Sullivan. She's partner and COO at Forum Ventures. Her and I talk about how platform roles are evolving inside venture firms and how AI is changing the startup and investor journey. And Olivia talks about why founders should treat fundraising as a two-way street. So whether you're an early stage founder, a platform specialist, or you're just curious about where venture is headed, there's a lot to take away from this one. So let's get into it and say hello to Olivia. Hi, Olivia. How are you?
I am doing great. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here chatting with you.
Yeah, great. I'm excited too. I love to talk about platforms, the underside of venture operations that I feel doesn't get enough attention. But first, tell us about yourself. Who are you? What you do?
Yeah. So as you mentioned, I'm Olivia. I have spent the last 6.5 years at Forum Ventures, which is a B2B SaaS focused fund. We're based out in New York, San Francisco, and Toronto. And today there, I'm a partner and COO where I get to lead our platform team across marketing, fundraising, and operations. And we've backed now 500 companies, which is wild to think. And those companies have gone on to grow and scale and raise more than a billion in follow-on capital. But I started my career actually in brand and product marketing. So spent a lot of time thinking about how to launch new products and services, everything from McDonald's dollar menu to the Wall Street Journal's Journal House. So I've spent a lot of time sitting on go-to-market and operations teams. And that led me into the world of venture.
That's an amazing span from Big Macs to Dow Jones. What is, for the listener or viewer, for the audience, what is a platform when we talk about that
Yeah.
world? Yeah.
If you ask probably 10 different people, what does platform look like at your specific venture fund, you'd probably get 10 slightly different answers depending on their focus area. But the way that I like to think about it is this horizontal layer that is sort of the foundation of the firm. And these teams are oriented to help drive leverage across the key areas of a firm's life cycle and goals. So maybe some teams are really focused on that pre-investing side of how do we source incredible founders to be able to invest in. Many teams are focused on that post-investment side of things. How do we help support our founders in growing and scaling their businesses? And some teams are sort of sitting along the value chain saying, how do we help, drive leverage for the firm in these key areas that ultimately allow us to return capital back to our LPs and continue this cycle of being able to invest in great founders. So that's how I like to think about it at kind of 10,000 foot view.
We're in a world there's so much content, and content meaning, everything from written to this to, video to events.
Right.
What's the key to standing out?
Man, I wish there was a secret sauce. As you know, as someone who's spent a lot of time in the world of communications broadly, I wish there was some magic way you could wave a wand and everyone would know about you and have deep affinity towards your brand. But we know, sadly, that is not the case. I would say there's a few things that we think about. You mentioned one of this this big sort of founder community that we have. I think really the most important thing for us, obviously, a North Star that we think about as a team is kind of fund through rate. Um, Venture is a long game, and sometimes you don't know for many years, what the trajectory of an investment may actually be in the long term. And so we often think about what are the leading indicators that lets us see how something is trending and progressing. And so fund through rate, how many companies are graduating to that next stage of funding, seed, series A, so on, is important for us. But I would say the other metric that we care deeply about is founder experience and sort of NPS of the founders and how they feel about working with us, being part of the portfolio. And that's something that we maniacally obsess over. And so I think what is great is if you do care deeply, about that founder experience or any brand, your customer experience, those people will be, advocates for you, brand advocates for you out in the ecosystem. So that's certainly something that we have to our advantage because the portfolio is big, diverse, located all over the globe. We have people, in cities where our team maybe isn't spending a ton of time or we're not headquartered, but have those sort of advocates for us. Some of the things that we found to be super successful over the last year is we still host, big tentpole events where we have hundreds of people coming with lots of speakers, but we also host coffees monthly in 7 cities every month across the US consistently. And we've seen that that kind of consistency in showing up allows you to build real relationships with people, but really establish yourself in these ecosystems. The other two things that have been, I would say, effective for us is we're really thinking about how do we democratize kind of access to funding and capital and help sort of demystify some of what is going on in the world of venture. Founders are obviously only interacting with investors in certain time periods as they're fundraising. And if you're a first time founder raising a pre-seed round for the first time, it can feel very like obtuse and unclear. So a lot of what we try to do is really bring that sort of authentic energy to the events, really create welcoming spaces that people feel like they meet great other authentic people, but also really learn and understand from their peers. And the last thing that we've found to be helpful in a lot of the work that we do is building out ecosystem relationships. So that might look for us as saying, hey, who are some of the key players in these cities that really care about supporting early stage founders just like us? Some of that might be economic development groups. Some of that might be, incubators who are not taking equity, but just helping people in that ideation phase. That might be individual people who are super connectors or nodes, and really investing time in building relationships with those people and helping to kind of activate those networks around the events that we're doing, the content that we're thinking about, and using them as ways to talk to founders and figure out what is it that people want, from us, and what are some of the stories or experiences that we should be creating.
Do you find that founders don't know how to engage with platforms? Maybe first-time founders. What advice would you have for founders?
I would say that as you're, having conversations with investors during your fundraise, I would encourage everyone to feel empowered to ask all the questions that they need to know about an investor, to be able to make a good decision, because there is an inherent and unfortunate power dynamic, I think, that often exists between founders and investors. And I notice that very often first time founders see it as, I'm pitching my business to someone and I need to convince an investor to be able to lean in. But while that is part of the equation, the other half is that, you need to make sure that you're bringing on the right partners to be able to support your growth. And when things are great and maybe when things are bad, that you feel like you have good people on your side to be able to celebrate the high highs, but also weather through some inevitable challenging storms. And I would say as well, have conversations if you're getting sort of towards that term sheet or goal line. Do some back channel references, talk to some of the founders in their portfolio. We so often introduce companies to founders in our portfolio that we work with to give kind of perspective and thoughts, on their own calls of what it's been like working with us and what they can expect. So I'd say that's sort of pre-investment, what I would encourage everyone to do. Um, I would encourage founders like take advantage of those, be proactive in reaching out. If you have a problem or a challenge, make sure that you're being forthcoming and raising your hand to say, hey, like I'm looking to get in front of these types of customers, or hey, like I'm trying to figure out my pricing strategy. Do you have anyone who can help with this? If it's in that kind of sphere of what they're saying they're able to provide. We at Forum try to create a lot of product services resources that founders can access on
Mm.
their own. So network directories and different tooling that people can plug into so that we're not always sort of the bottleneck of things. But I always say like the founders who, are sort of the squeaky wheel in a good way of saying like, hey, I need help, often get a lot of, that one-on-one time and attention. Obviously for us as the portfolio grows, we think a lot about how are we dedicating time and resources, because while we want everyone to have an amazing experience, at the end of the day, we also have to make sure that we're concentrating our efforts as well towards kind of the bigger goals that we have as a fund. But I would say raise your hand and flag things where you need help. If it's unclear, what type of support an investor is going to provide, ask those questions. There are some firms who don't have, dedicated platform functions, and you may just have sort of the partner as your sort of key point of for support, and take advantage of that relationship. I think that investors, many, hopefully most, like really want to be able to do what they can to help their portfolio companies succeed. So too many people, I think, do not take full advantage of what is there.
Yeah, I agree. And that's great advice, everything you outlined. Raise your hand, ask questions, ask for references. Speaking of the platform, just one more, you've seen them, you've worked with them over the years. How are they changing? Are you seeing any trends crop up that, we should take note of?
Yeah, it has changed a lot. Even, when I first joined, even 6+ years ago, it was still pretty nascent. And I would say that
Mhm.
the platform function has professionalized a lot over the last 5 years, which
Oh,
I think is really positive. Back 5+ years ago, the people who were in this function was much smaller. It was a lot more sort of ad hoc and
mhm.
how can I do anything and everything to kind of help support our founders. I would say now teams are thinking a lot more around, what is our unique right to win in this space? Where can we help support founders in ways that other people cannot? I would say the trends that I'm seeing now, and this is probably true across most industries, is thinking, how do we start leveraging tooling and technology, AI, to really create outsized leverage for the team? We're seeing a lot more, I would say I'm seeing a lot more firms who are sort of orchestrating generalist folks to kind of run these teams, but maybe bringing in, data scientists or engineers who are sort of sitting as specialists within that to really be able to help build out products both for the firm, but also for the portfolio company. I have to give one of my coworkers a shout out, Alejandro. One of the things that we had recently flagged with our finance team was having better visibility into some of the cash flow of the companies that we're working with in our studio, which is, we're working very closely with these founders. We're helping to build the product and essentially kind of a fractional co-founder to them. And he actually ended up with some support from our engineering team building out a tool on Cursor that allows, connectivity to Brex and allows us to be able
Yeah.
to better track transactions, help with cash flow and modeling, and actually build out kind of robust financial models and do different scenario planning that we can collaboratively log into this platform and use it alongside our company. So that's a trend that I'm seeing, and I think is going to really set apart teams over the next, call it 5 years, of how are we actually creating even more leverage, productizing a lot of maybe the manual things that teams were doing. And I think that's really exciting.
I love that you referenced AI and kind of how you're using it. I've talked with three founders in the last week plus who, who using AI agents, and one said, well, a couple of them said, the teams are smaller. How's that? How are you seeing this use of AI impacting your founders, founding teams in general?
Yeah, it's a similar trend to what we're seeing on our side as well. Peter Walker, actually from Carta, just released some
Oh, right.
interesting data around time of incorporation to first few hires, and that has been extending. Obviously, many factors probably are going into influencing that, but I'm
Right.
sure, and he called out as well that, some of this consolidation or waiting by leveraging, automation or AI to help with some of these small tasks that maybe you would have, brought on a team. I think the other thing we're hearing from founders as well, which has been interesting and is sort of in the cultural zeitgeist right now, is seed strapping and this
Hmm.
idea of, am I able to raise a small amount of capital, this beginning sort of seed round. I've validated something and use this capital then to still scale the business, and I have ambitions, as a founder to swing for the fences and have this huge outcome, but maybe not necessarily saying, okay, I'm going to now go on this venture treadmill of raising an A and a B and a C and continuing to raise money. So I think it's interesting to see how, in conversations that I'm having with founders and our team, it feels like there has been, sort of a shift in how founders think about building their businesses and maintaining ownership and, what success looks like for them. I think some of that comes down to how they're able to scale without having to hire a bunch of people. But I think jury's out in terms of what that will look like
Hmm.
over the next few years. Obviously, we're in a challenging, still macro environment, which has made downstream funding more challenging. And so it'll be interesting to see, as things shake out, as interest rates continue to go down. Hopefully, we get some liquidity
Right.
for LPs over these next few years. How that will change dynamics, but we're certainly seeing sort of similar things to the conversations you're having with founders and how they're thinking about what it means to build a generational business. And maybe that doesn't always mean hiring a ton of people and raising a ton of capital.
So, how are you seeing AI impact the role of the venture firm itself? How's it impacting what you do in the platform?
Yeah, this is something I'm thinking a lot about right now of how we can better leverage AI internally across our business. I think there's small portions that we're currently using it very actively on the sourcing side, but thinking more holistically of how do we make it very easy, for our team to be able to find information and make better decisions.
Hmm.
I'm seeing, actually just got off the phone earlier. I had a call with one of our co-investors, Correlation
Oh,
Ventures,
yeah.
which is they're a
Oh,
completely
really?
algorithmic investor. One thing that Trevor and I spoke about is a lot of firms right now, are using models or artificial intelligence on a sourcing kind of signal side of things, which we do of how do you find companies, maybe before other people by identifying different, signals in market, or for us, we're looking at companies when maybe they haven't even posted anywhere that they're starting a company. So some of those early signals when people are still in stealth. Um, and a lot of people are using it more for streamlined operations. He and I were discussing more and more firms thinking about how they're actually using this from a decision making frame. And I think that'll be interesting to see what shakes out there. There was a recent interview with Mark Andreessen, who sort of said, like, I think that, the investing decision at the early stage will continue to be done by people because there's all of these intangible
Right.
factors that are very hard to assess about a founder versus, someone like Correlation or Signal Fire or 645. Some of these more, data driven firms would probably argue that humans are also very irrational and can't really make good decisions. And it's really easy to look, in hindsight and say, this is, we made this decision for this reason, but mapping things to data and modeling those out, I think gives you more consistency, but it'll be interesting to see. I think there'll be firms that will stay very squarely in wanting to have that kind of human driven approach, and likely people who will shift towards more of this algorithmic side. I think the thing I always worry about is, what type of information and data sets are we actually training, some of these models on? And when you think about pattern recognition, in the world of venture, I would say there's lots of people who maybe don't fit that traditional mold necessarily, who, whether you're a woman or an underrepresented founder, or lots of other people who maybe have historically or don't have this background that indicates that they should be this incredible founder. These like unproven founders often end up becoming incredibly successful. And I think that those are things where those kind of outliers that maybe don't fit into, a model, I am always want to make sure that those people are still getting, an investment, and we'll see how the world shakes out in that way.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to hear you say that. I feel the same way, that the algorithm can easily pass over the underserved. Final thoughts, Olivia, as we wind down here on platforms and kind of where we're headed, and the use of AI, tie it all together, bring us home.
I think it'll be an interesting time. I think the next 18 months there will be like a big emphasis of how do we automate a lot of things, how do we productize stuff. I think from that it'll be interesting to see. My hunch is that there'll probably be like a re-emphasis then on human connection and in-person relationships, and like bringing people together and building kind of authentic relationships. So I think that while lots of things will be automated, the role will end kind of career path of a platform professional will continue to professionalize. People will spend, their careers in these roles, which I think is pretty cool. But I also think there will be a little bit of return to this, creating unique experiences, bringing people together in person. And so I'm excited to see kind of the confluence of those two things. And if anyone is thinking about platform or has questions or is looking to kind of break in, I write a lot about this, and I'm happy to shoot me a connection or note on LinkedIn, and always happy to connect with folks who are thinking about how they're scaling their own function or breaking in. So yeah.
Yeah, and you write on, and final pitch. What's your Substack?
The Platform Shift.
Okay, well, that's a great place to end. Olivia O'Sullivan from Foreign Ventures, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great to spend the time chatting.
Hi again, everyone. That was Olivia O'Sullivan from Foreign Ventures. For me, a few big takeaways stand out, including how founders are rethinking growth thanks to AI, and I like Olivia's suggestion that founders need to ask investors better questions. If you liked what she had to say, please remember to hit like and subscribe, and share this episode with someone who works in venture, content, or startups. It really helps the podcast grow. And if you're watching on YouTube, go and check out my other show in collaboration with AInews.com. That one's called The AI Cognitive Shift, and we dig into how AI is impacting society and the future of work. Thanks for listening to the Venture Variety Show. Catch you next time.